Hello, everybody. Welcome to Rants on the Ruling Class. We are back after the short hiatus, but good to be back with my buddy Bill here. We don't really have we didn't, we did a little prepping before this, but we really didn't have a direction we wanted to go. But I think we had one common thing that we wanted to talk about. And last week or last time we were on, I think we kind of had maybe it was a bit of a downer for some people listening to that. But when you look at what's going on, the totality of circumstances today. Uh, I've said it on this podcast several times. Just when you think things can't get any crazier, they continue to go and spiral in a crazier direction. But really, what's happening, there's a lot of good things happening in our country. And, we've said for a lot of years that not just us, but a lot of other talking heads that know a lot about politics, and that culture or politics is downstream from culture. So, really, when we talk about a war for our country, we're really talking about the war for culture, the war on our minds, the war for our kids. But there's a lot of good things happening. The culture, although it is controlled by all of the left lunacy in this country, they hold all the power sources, our media, our universities, and such. It's very clear to me that they are losing a grip on that, and it's coming unwound for them at a very rapid pace. And there's plenty of stories. We're going to get into a few of them here that lean to that. But I think, don't be weary in the war that we're fighting right now. There's a lot of good things that are happening, and it's not the time to get frustrated and give up. It's time to stay the course and speak truth to people. And you're not alone. Right? For many years, we all thought maybe we were alone, and maybe we were the ones that were crazy. And how can people think that way? Maybe I really am the crazy one out of this whole thing. Well, you're not. And culture is starting to shift and show that you're not crazy, and we're not alone, and we are not the silent majority anymore. We're becoming the vocal majority, and that's a good thing. So with that, Bill, I guess I'll tee it up to you. You wanted to go through some stories. You had a story maybe you want to tell about culture, but glad you're here, man.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Likewise. And, everything you just said is very, very true. There is a story, a true story I wanted to share because it was kind of an eye-opening experience for me, and it has to do with culture. And we're going to talk a lot about culture. And I hope that doesn't turn people off or they just eyes glaze over or something, because really the story I want to tell, I think, kind of explains what we mean when we talk about culture in a nutshell. And I think it makes it a very easy, understandable thing because culture is real. We can't deny it. Okay, it's very real. It has an effect, like you just said. Politics is downstream from culture, and the war we've been in. Yes, it's a war for our government. Yes, it's a war to save our country. Yes, all of that's true, but it's really a culture war. That's really what's been at the bottom of it. That's what the left has been fighting with us for decades, is to win the culture. And when they do that, they take over the universities, right? They do all these other things that eventually seeps into the boardrooms of CEOs, the lawyers, attorneys that eventually turn into judges. All of these things they win by changing the culture. But here's the thing: the American culture, Todd, is very, very different than what it is in the rest of the world. And even though, and that's one of the reasons they struggle so hard to change our culture here, because it's not like South America where you can just go elect a new government and all of a sudden everybody, they get behind it, or maybe they throw a revolution every once in a while. It's our culture has been a culture of independence. It's been a culture of freedom, of free speech, Second Amendment gun rights, self reliance, all of those things. And even though we see it, sometimes it looks like it's being torn down brick by brick, that foundation is still there. And I want to compare and contrast that to a woman I met who actually married a friend of mine. The thing was, he met her when he was traveling. I think I've traveled a lot internationally. I've enjoyed that, and I had a buddy that it was a similar bent. He liked traveling internationally, and he actually met a woman in Beijing. He ended up marrying her and brought her to the United States. Very sharp lady, but she had spent her entire life growing up under a communist regime. And not only her life, understand, her father, her grandparents, I mean, everybody in living memory that she'd ever known had grown up living under a communist regime with all the indoctrination that goes with that. And you can see it in some funny ways. For example, my buddy just bought himself a new home right before they got married. So when she came over, he introduced this brand new home to her, and she was like, "Okay, well, this is really nice." But within a week, she was asking him, can we, so they went to visit some friends that lived in an apartment complex. And within a week of that visit, she was asking him, could we move into an apartment? And he's blown away. He's like, wait a minute, I don't understand. We've got, a decent home. I mean, it wasn't out in the country, but it was on a neighborhood, but but still it's their own home and they've got their privacy. And she's like, I'm not used to this. I get scared, because if you think about it, she grew up in government housing and she was what you would consider middle class for China. So it wasn't like she was poor, but government issued apartment housing where the density, everyone's living on top of each other, the lack of noise, the lack of hearing the children, neighbors' children from upstairs running around, or pots and pans in the kitchen from next door, the lack of that silence, that isolation was just jarring to her.
It's crazy.
And it was, but that's how she was indoctrinated her entire life. And now that's what we call culture. That's the culture she grew up in. Give you another example. She mentioned to my buddy one time that, look, she went to see a doctor, and she came back and said, well, I don't really like this doctor. And she didn't even want to tell him at first, but it was wrong. Well, I really don't like this doctor. He goes, well, we'll change. We'll get a different one. She's like, we can do that? Because you see, they
Wow.
have no choice where they're from. That's the culture. They do not have the basic freedoms we take for granted are non-existent in those other cultures. And a lot of the things that we don't spend a second, don't give a second thought to, privileges, rights, whatever you want to call them, are foreign to most of the world, Todd. We live in a very unique situation here. And so, yes, we do have those same communist, leftist, globalist, elitist trying to shoehorn us into the same communist model of China or Cuba or whatever it might be. But the problem is the American people don't shoehorn in and don't fit that because it's not our culture. And that's why it's been such a struggle. For
Yeah.
decades, they have been trying to shoehorn us into this, and it's never stuck. And it looks now, for all appearances, it looks like, well, they're finally succeeding, because you're right. They have taken over the power centers in government, the leadership of government of both parties. They have taken over the leadership in our universities. They have taken over a lot of our judicial system. Not all. That's probably one of the last bastions, but they've got a lot of it. They have taken over a lot of CEO C-suites, right? The seventh floor of a lot of corporations, boardrooms, et cetera. So, a lot of these things going on out there, and the greed that goes with globalism and the riches have seduced a lot of billionaires, a lot of companies, a lot of high income earners that, know their $200,000, $300,000 a year salaries and above are tied to globalism and the riches and the trade that brings and everything else. So, that whole culture gets meshed together. And yeah, we do see a lot of that. But the bottom line is this: that's not the majority.
Right.
The majority of people in our country don't have grandfathers that, were told, your children have to grow up sharing bathrooms. Your little, they grew up in families where they didn't have to have their little girls exposed to little boys' penises.
Yeah.
I mean, you just pick your poison here, pick whatever it is. But, they didn't grow up in an era where we have to seriously doubt our elections, right? Because where we just count on there being fraud in the elections. There's always been some, there always probably will be some, but not to this extent, right? So what's happening is, with every revelation, with every new atrocity on our culture, okay, you see a rebound. For every action, there's an opposite and equal reaction. And what is happening is those rebounds are creating ripples throughout the culture. And, I was talking to a friend the other day. He goes, well, I don't know if the American people wake up in time or whatever. And I'm like, you're right and you're wrong. Because if you're talking about the 2024 election, are you going to have a whole lot of people going out there all of a sudden and changing their mind and campaigning for Donald Trump? No, not in the numbers we'd like to see. But when you get people inside that ballot booth, that voting booth, all by themselves, when there's no cameras, when it's a private vote, that's a whole different story.
That they can trust, and they know they can trust.
Yeah, I mean, it's one thing to carry a Trump flag or put a Trump flag on your house and stand out, or to go onto a social media post and a thread and commentary and start defending Trump, or defending the border wall, or any of these things that a lot of us think are common sense. That takes a certain level of courage. But the bar is so much lower to stand up for yourself when you're in a voting booth.
I'd agree.
Okay. Okay. So there's a huge difference, and these ripples are affecting huge amounts of people. Now, I would argue that the same thing is true of polling. And I know you can't trust a lot of polls, but there are some polls, Rasmussen, there's a few polls out there that I tend to give a fair amount of credibility to. And they've been right, by the way. That's one reason. It's one good reason to give them credibility. But the things they're telling us today, Todd, are a pure reflection of the change in our culture. I'm going to go through a few examples with you here.
Well, let me say something first before, when I was thinking while you were talking through that, a culture is really what you promote and what you tolerate, whether that's in business or whatever it is. It's really it's driven by your core values, drives the culture. And they cannot erode our core values. And that's why they're having a hard time pushing over the finish line here, getting a culture changed to one of totalitarianism or communism or socialism or whatever ism you want. It's because they cannot touch our core values. Our core values are not going to change. We were raised as people that value liberty, religious freedom, independence from the government, small government, taking care of our family, going to church, putting God and family first. Those are our core values. And when you can't penetrate that, when the globalists can't penetrate into your core values, because your core values drive what you do every day. They never take the day off. Your core values are always there, and they drive your decisions on a daily basis. When we have the core values of a Judeo-Christian society that we have here, that's the stopgap in the culture shift in my mind. When you were talking through that, I was like, it's because the way we were raised. It's our core value system that we have here. And now people are saying, I don't value that stuff. I don't want it in my life. Get it out. And that's why.
And I want to add one thing to what you're saying, because you're absolutely right. Thank you for elucidating that. But it goes beyond religion, because we see our Judeo-Christian culture. That's very true. But that culture extends beyond Christians. It extends to the culture of the American culture.
Right.
Okay. And that's the whole point we're making. It's all about the way all of us were raised and indoctrinated, the value systems we accepted, the mores we have, all of these things that you're talking about. So that is very, very true. And it doesn't change overnight. And it takes takes generations upon generations to really do it. And they're trying to rush it on us.
They're full speed ahead right now.
Oh, they are. And I think they know they're running out of runway. As a matter of fact, I can tell you this, at least the Biden administration portion of the ruling class, they are in full panic mode right now.
I would agree.
I mean, some of these polls that are coming out, and believe me, they have internal polls that are more accurate than the public polls that go on out there. But right now, young people, Todd, young people are moving to Trump in record numbers. I mean, it is alarming if you're a Democrat, it is alarming. And I think this is why you've seen some Democrat representatives and public officials switch parties. I mean, literally just go out there and say, hey, I'm going Republican, Democrat parties left me, because they know they cannot be reelected, even in sectors that are blatantly blue, that are overwhelmingly Democrat. You have Democrat politicians switching their party affiliation to Republican because they can't get elected in Democrat districts running as a Democrat with the current Democrat Party. Now, how profound is that?
It is, but you look, I seen, he's probably 20-something guy the other day with a t-shirt on, and it cracked me up because, you think of young kids, that it's really a battle for our youth in this country. And he had a shirt on, and he was walking away from us, and I think we're in a store or something, and said I was going to be dressed up as a liberal for Halloween, but my head wouldn't fit up my butt. So I was like, maybe there is hope, maybe there is hope. Kids do get it, and they're being very vocal about it. And I got a giggle out of it, but that may be a sign that they're really losing the culture war too.
One of the leaders of the Black Lives Movement just came out publicly and endorsed Donald Trump and supported the J6ers.
That's crazy to me.
That is a sign of the culture changing.
Yeah.
And one of these same polls, we talked about the young people. There's more than one polling institution out there now that are saying, and it's funny to watch how they say it, because it's almost like they can't believe their own polls, or they don't want to believe them. But they're coming out and saying, we're showing that up to 50% of the Black population in this country would at least consider voting for Donald Trump.
We've said for a long time, you get to 20 and it's over and done. 20% of the Black voters vote for conservative, it's over.
Well, what if the poll's only half right? What if it's 25%?
Yeah.
30%. I mean, yeah, it's huge. So the culture is changing. People come back and say, well, yeah, Bill, but there's still fraud in the elections. Look, this particular podcast is not about that, but understand we're not sidestepping the issue, because the fraud can only go so far under our current infrastructure. Now you give them another 8, 10, 12 years of owning the government. Maybe they'll change it enough. That's not true. But under our current election infrastructure, you can't overcome a 10-point, 20-point loss. You just can't. It's not there. You
have
can't
to
do
cheat
it
so badly that you would have way more votes than you had registered Democrat voters. And it doesn't take anybody with half.
You'd have to have more votes than you had voters, period.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, it just can't stand. So the Democrats are literally shaking in their boots. And I mean that very, very seriously. And you see all of these, and here's the thing, all of these rumors that go around, call them conspiracy theories or whatever. I mean, you have Joe Biden on a video here the other day. First of all, he's supposed to be making a speech about Israel and the conflict in the Middle East. Doesn't even talk about, all he talks about funding for Ukraine and of course Israel too. Ties it all together. More of his graft money to send out. Doesn't address the carnage, doesn't address the terrorism, doesn't address all of the Middle Easterners and potential terrorists flooding across our southern border. Doesn't address any of that, and nobody paid attention. I heard a joke the other day. The lowest episode of The Apprentice got higher ratings than Joe Biden's national speech the other night. Okay, so I mean, that's really the take of the American public right now. That goes directly to culture. And it's happening all over. This, not restricted to the Biden campaign. And this is the point I want to make. There are billionaire donors that are backing away, have pulled their donations from Harvard and several other Ivy League institutions because of what they have allowed to go on with their student body coming out and supporting all the terrorist activities of Hamas against Israel. All of the unbelievable carnage, and I don't want to go there again either, but it's a bridge too far for American culture.
You can't have our core values and stand on that side of that issue and say that you support America first. You can't do it. It's impossible to do.
Well, you can't. And these liberals, these Democrats, these globalists, this is what they're trying to jam down our throats. And to do it, they've needed the support of the fringe liberal leftist insane crowd. And this crowd is turning out to be their bane. In other words, we've always said leftists, they'll eat their own. They'll turn around and end up eating their own. Okay. And that's part of what we're seeing right now. The Squad is some of the most unpopular people.
Oh man.
AOC and Tlaib and all these other Squad members in Congress. They're some of the most unpopular people in Congress in forever. I mean, it is unreal, the backlash that they've been experiencing. We have a lot of rhinos right now in Congress that I've been reading articles that they're just, now this is how naive they are or bubbled, or how their culture, that elitist culture that they've locked themselves into, the paradigm they've locked themselves into, it's how deceiving it is. But they're talking to each other off the record saying, I can't believe what's going on. I have people calling my wife telling me I better support Jim Jordan. I mean, they can't believe the response of the American people. They're so used to telling the American people what to do that when the American people, their own constituents, come back, and these are the establishment rhino, elitist globalists that want to sit up there and tell us what to do and what, defeat us, whatever, and tell us that we'll like it, right? So
Funny you say that, because I was with some of my buddies yesterday. We were sitting around watching football and talking, and just out of the clear blue, one of them looks at me and goes, "Who are we gonna get to primary Ken Buck?" I'm like, "I don't know. We better find somebody, don't you think?" And he goes, "Yeah, we've got to get him primary." And we weren't even talking about politics.
Yeah,
he's involved in the Republican Party here, and I know his stance on politics, but out of the clear blue, we got to find somebody to primary Ken Buck. He's let us down. He's lost us. He doesn't represent us anymore. And I think you'll find the same thing with Don Bacon's constituents in Nebraska.
Yep.
Ken Buck, what he's pulling off up there at the Capitol right now, nobody around here wants anything to do with him anymore. So
no, those 25 rhino
from his office in Colorado, they evicted him.
Tell that story. Tell that story.
Well, I guess the guy that owns the building where his office is at is a big Republican donor and supporter, and they kicked him out because he won't support Jim Jordan for Speaker of the House. They booted him. So that's the culture shift where people are done listening to politicians. You and I have said forever, there's nothing special about people that get elected. Most of them, the only reason they get elected is because that's what their whole effort is getting elected. Doesn't mean they're smarter, or they have any better ideas than you or I or a lot of mainstream Americans in this country. It's just that they are so hell-bent on getting elected that's where they put their focus on, and then they stay focused on that to get reelected. But they are not special people. They're not any smarter. They're not gifted. They're a lot of them corrupt at this point, we're finding out, and a lot of them do what they want, and they're bought and paid for it. People are finding that out in record numbers, I think.
Well, public office was never intended to be a reward. It was always considered to be a burden.
Right.
And so you've got a lot of the best and brightest of us that really don't want that burden. Which, you can say, well, they should be patriotic and take their turn. Well, okay, maybe let's get back to that. But, that's the reason all of these, shall we say, less than average people with huge egos have been able to step up and fill the void and obtain our elective office because nobody else really wanted it. And it's time for the statesman man or woman, it's time for statesmen to stand up and be heard and put their hat in the ring for all these things. Of the 25 rhino Republicans voted against Jim Jordan. And by the way, I am not 100% behind Jim Jordan. I mean, there are things I don't, that I've come to understand and not like too much about Jim Jordan, but of everybody that's been going on here, of all our options, he was clearly the best option in my mind. And especially at that point in time. So for the 25, see what these 25 rhino Republicans in Congress did, including Ken Buck, is they stood up and they said, we will join with the Democrats to elect a Democrat speaker if Jordan doesn't resign, if he doesn't stop his move for the speakership. Now, that's how far Ken Buck and those people are willing to go. So that also, my friend, is a bridge too far.
Yes,
and when you talk about the primaries coming up, well, quickly, beginning of this coming year, probably for the House, for the majority of them, then their election will be at the same time Trump's election is, November of 2024. But I would guess that at least half of them will be primaried. It'd be nice if we could make a clean sweep of that 25, but some of them live in pretty strong districts where, I mean, the one in Texas, Bush money just totally controls that district. It's, who knows? Maybe they'll lose it too. We don't know, but I would guess at least half of them will be gone. And the difference that'll make in Congress, Todd, oh my goodness.
Be huge.
And it wouldn't even take that many in the Senate to go ahead and totally annihilate Mitch McConnell's block of the establishment globalist rhino senators. So yes, it does. So a lot of things are going the right direction. A lot of billionaire donors are pulling away from these rhinos. They're pulling out, and since we're talking about politicians here real quickly, there's just a billionaire Democrat donor that just pulled up and announced that he has reevaluated and he's now going to support Donald Trump. He's not going to support the Democrat Party anymore.
It's one of those things, if you're still a holdout and your hatred for Donald Trump is that bad, to me, it's like sitting on an airplane and hating the pilot so bad that you want him to crash the plane because you hate him and you're sitting on the same plane. It's
yeah,
insane.
here he is right here. I can't pronounce his name right, but Kamath Philippahaya or something like that says Trump derangement syndrome blocks people from seeing that many of Trump's policies were solid. This is a Democrat billionaire.
Yep.
That has given millions of dollars to the Democrat cause. Okay,
Culture
so
shift.
What's that?
Culture shift.
Okay. Yep. So I mean, a lot of good things are happening like that. A lot of our universities are being exposed. On the same token, you have a lot of billionaire donors and backers, annual backers of Harvard and other Ivy League schools and other big universities, and they've said no, we're not donating anymore. We're not paying for this. Did I mention Bill Maher yet? Bill Maher went on TV, and Bill Maher is a tremendous cultural icon. He is a huge cultural icon, a comedian, has a show every week. I don't watch it. I see clips every once in a while because he's a liberal guy. But he just flat out stated the other night, parents, stop sending your kids to Ivy League schools. Not only are you throwing your money away, you're killing our country. These are indoctrination camps. They are not schools. They're not getting an education. I mean, flat out said it in a serious way that only Bill Maher can by ridiculing
Well,
it.
he's a liberal, but he has a pretty good pulse on. He tells the truth too.
Yes,
Whether he agrees with
does.
it or not, or thinks the same way. He does tell the truth about a lot of things.
Well, it's kind of like
why we're talking about culture change is that we've had this unfettered era of climate change going on forever. That how if you question the climate change or you're a climate denier or whatever the case may be, but that is changing too. And I think Epoch Times put out an article, and I think it got dumped in our think tank group that we have for our members. But they're saying that era is over. It's time to start questioning, start challenging the climate change claim. And a professor from Princeton had a quote in that article, but pretty much hits the nail on the head, not only with climate change, but with a lot of stuff that they do, the left does. But it says, quote, "Of course, the climate cult will be dismissive of any information, no matter how scientifically correct, that is politically incorrect." And they don't care how scientifically correct something is. If it doesn't follow the narrative or push political agenda, they won't repeat it, and they'll deny that. And that's a good quote, but that you can look at that goes along with our voting system, our voter fraud, climate change, taxes, any of that stuff is the same thing. They don't care how scientifically or factual correct it is. If it's politically incorrect, they're not going to say it.
Coca-Cola just quietly removed their Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter support, financial support. George Soros is shuttering offices, going through massive layoffs of his entire organization.
That can happen soon enough.
The federal judge just announced they will not hire clerks who signed letters defending Hamas.
Good. Shouldn't.
No, absolutely shouldn't. I mean, people are starting to stand up. People are starting to feel emboldened to come out and speak the truth. Whereas in the past, they kind of been cowed into silence. The Louisiana governorship, a Republican just won the Louisiana governorship. And Todd, I cannot tell you how big a deal this is. Louisiana, the South has been trending more conservative over recent years, except for Louisiana. And one of the reasons is the culture in Louisiana has been very socialist. There's been a Democrat machine down there forever and ever and ever, and there's so much poverty in and around New Orleans and around in that state. And basically the promise has been, hey, government will take care of you. The bigger the government, the more you're going to be taken care of and everything else. And people finally stood up and said they had enough. I mean, this was a jungle primary. How many were there? 9 people?
14,
running?
I think.
14.
Got 52% out of that.
Amazing. This is a conservative guy.
Yeah,
and
good.
So the culture is definitely changed in Louisiana, and that's a harbinger of things to come here. So, there are all kinds of good things happening. We don't hear about it. The other side certainly doesn't want us to know about it, but the culture is swinging. And the good thing about culture, it's like a steamship. When the days we used to have steamship, like the Titanic and stuff like that. You can't turn those ships on a dime, right? I mean, if you want to turn, I think it's like an aircraft carrier would be a good analogy. I've been told anyway that if you're sailing along, steaming along or sailing along in a aircraft carrier, and you want to make a 90-degree turn, it's going to take you, is it 11 miles in order to make that turn? You're still going to proceed 11 miles forward before you can complete that turn because of your momentum. It's so huge. It's so large. And if I'm getting my numbers wrong, I apologize, but the analogy still holds here. Okay. And let alone make a U-turn. Right.
Right.
So my point is culture is like that. Culture, you can't turn it on a dime. Culture, you have to start turning, but you're still going to have your momentum of going the direction you're going. We're still going to see progress towards liberalism in our culture, even as the culture is changing. And that's something we have to keep in mind.
Yeah.
But the change is real. The change is very, very real. And then here's the good thing. Once we get it turned 180 degrees, Todd, it's going to be just as hard for anybody else to turn it back, if not harder,
Well,
because
I think
recent
it will be
memory.
harder because we let it get turned the first time, and people are going to say we're not doing that again.
Exactly. Exactly.
We're staying on the course. Our
We are
core
saying,
values are going to dictate how this country runs, and yeah, it's a good thing. There's a lot of crazy things going on that if you get bogged down in it, there's a lot of negative stuff going on. But by and large, I think the shift that I see happening, not only geopolitically in this country, but worldwide, uh, other countries are waking up to the globalist regime in game too.
yep.
And
One last,
we've got to stand our ground, because if there's nobody coming to save the United States, if we fall, the world is done.
no, you're right. And geopolitically, it could be another podcast. There's a lot of good things happening around the world too.
Yeah.
One thing I didn't want to forget to mention has to do with Sidney Powell.
Oh, yeah.
And Sidney Powell was a Trump attorney. I think she's been a hero, right? Heroine for the cause here for a long time. And the headlines lately are Trump attorney pleads guilty to charges and agrees to testify, and the left's trying to make hay about this. They're talking about Sidney Powell. Don't believe it. Let me explain what's happened here. The federal government, our DOJ, we talked about how it's weaponized. The charges they brought against Sidney Powell were so egregious, so overcharged, was what they call it in the legal community. In other words, they threw everything at her, every charge at her they could, whether even remotely applied or not, and most of them didn't. And so what happened here recently, now it's been lawfare. They've been trying to bankrupt her. And I think they've about got her there, to be honest, if truth be known. Because I
That's their
think
whole
she's
end
still,
game. That's what they want to do.
it
You
is.
can't do anything legally.
And I think she would still fight it if it wasn't for that. But here's what happened. They ended up dropping every single felony charge against her. And they said, well, okay, we got a small misdemeanor here. If you'll plead guilty to it, we'll do this. And she had to jump at it. But she's not going to, but here, nothing in her pleading guilty against that misdemeanor hurts Trump in any way, shape, or form. And all the evidence that she had and collected and put on record, it's still there. So it's still available for everybody else to use and in future to use when it comes time for an accounting of everything that's happened here. So all of this huge propaganda about this Trump attorney, it's baloney. Sidney Powell's still a good person. I suppose she could surprise me if she testifies in a different way than I think she will, but I don't think she will. I think she's as good as gold, as good as she's ever been. And
well, it's still going to allow for the truth to come out. It's still going to benefit the election fraud case. It's still going to, unless she completely changes her stance and lies, it's still going to be good for the election fraud.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's hard. Remember this, they're going to try, like you call it, projection. The worse it gets for them, the more they're going to try to make us believe it's getting worse for us.
Yes.
Okay. So, and this is a perfect example of it. This is a huge win for us. They're going to try to make us think it's a huge loss for us. And that's going to continue happening. We've got a year till the general election comes up, a year and a month. So there's a lot of runway left. But Todd, here's what I'm excited about. With all the people that are waking up today, the youth, the minorities in our country, all kinds of Democrats out there, even the wealthy set, even the educated set, the university set, whatever you want to call them. I mean, the CEOs, with all of the people waking up in our country today, we've still got another year to get more. And that's the direction it's going. That it's trending in our direction now. So more and more people are going to continue waking up, and the more desperate the ruling class gets, the globalist establishment, the uniparty, what we call the ruling class, the more desperate they get,
Right.
the more it's going to trend for us.
Yes, because they're going
Culture.
to do more insane things. They're going to get crazier and crazier. They're like a caged animal right now. They don't know what to do, and everything they try is not working.
That's right.
So, yeah, stay the course. Stay the course.
That is exactly right. So it's culture, my friend. That's the whole point I wanted to make. It is all about culture.
It is, and I think maybe this gives you a little bit of hope. Hope it does. Keep your chin up, and remember, like I say every week on this when we do this podcast, it's always a great day to be an American, and today's no different than that. And communism, it still sucks, and it always will. We'll catch you guys on the next one. Thanks.
Okay. Thanks, Todd. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah.